The rain had turned Chicago's Gold Coast into a blur of neon and shadow by the time I stumbled out of the parking garage. My vision swam with tears I couldn't afford to let fall. My torn blazer hung awkwardly off one shoulder where Ortegan had grabbed me, and the familiar taste of copper filled my mouth from my split lip. I could feel the bruises already forming on my arms, finger-shaped accusations that no amount of long sleeves would hide tomorrow. "Just a performance review," he'd said. "Stay late. We need to discuss your numbers." I managed 3 blocks before my legs started shaking. The professional facade I'd maintained for 6 months, the one where I pretended everything was fine, where I showed up early and stayed late and never complained, cracked like ice under pressure. I needed somewhere warm, somewhere with people, somewhere he wouldn't follow. That's when I saw it. Nocturne. The upscale lounge sat on the corner like a jewel box, all amber lighting and expensive promise. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed well-dressed people drinking cocktails that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I'd walked past it 100 times, always averting my eyes from the beautiful people inside. I should have kept walking, should have found a diner or called an Uber I couldn't afford. Instead, I pushed through the heavy glass doors, desperation overriding common sense. The warmth hit me first, then the music, something low and jazzy. The scent of expensive cologne and aged whiskey made my head swim. Every head turned. I didn't belong here in my torn Ann Taylor clearance blazer and rain-soaked hair. I tried to back toward the door, but my vision blurred and I stumbled forward, directly into someone. The drink I'd knocked from his hand shattered against the floor in a spray of amber liquid and crystal. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll pay for that." The words tumbled out as I bent to pick up the pieces, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip anything. "Don't." The voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it stopped me cold. A hand caught my wrist before I could touch the broken glass. Not rough, but absolutely firm. I looked up. The man standing over me was maybe 35, tall, in a black suit that screamed expensive. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, but it was his eyes that made my breath catch. Dark, almost black in the low lighting. They swept over my face with focused intensity. He saw everything. The split lip, the bruises already darkening on my arm, the trembling in my hands, the way I flinched when he touched me. Something shifted in his expression. "Who did this to you?" His voice remained soft, but I heard steel underneath. "Nobody." I fell. "I'm fine." The lie came automatically. His thumb brushed across my wrist, right over the finger-shaped bruises. "Try again." I tried to pull away. "I really need to go. Marcus." He didn't raise his voice, didn't look away from my face, but a huge man materialized beside him, positioning himself between me and the door. Panic flared in my chest. "Please, I don't want any trouble." "Sit down." The command was delivered in that same dangerously soft voice. He guided me toward a private booth with a firm hand on my elbow. "You're not leaving until you tell me who hurt you." Before we dive into what happens next in this room, if you're already hooked by this story of survival and unexpected protection, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Now, back to that booth where everything is about to change. The booth was leather, expensive, tucked in the back where the lighting was softer and the music became a distant pulse. Matos guided me there with that firm hand on my elbow, his touch careful despite the authority behind it. When I flinched, his grip didn't tighten. He simply waited until I moved. Marcus appeared with ice wrapped in white cloth and 2 glasses of amber whiskey. Matos pushed one across the polished table toward me. "Drink. It helps with shock." I stared at it, my hands still trembling. He added, almost patiently, "If I wanted to hurt you, I'd have done it already." The logic was sound and terrifying. I picked up the glass and took a sip. It burned going down, smoother than anything I'd ever tasted. Matos leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped. The pose should have been relaxed, but everything about him radiated controlled danger. "Now, let's start simple. What's your name?" "Anita." My voice barely rose above a whisper. "Anita Pinkston." He repeated it like he was memorizing it. "I'm Matos Lloyd, and you're going to tell me exactly who put those bruises on your arms." I opened my mouth to lie again, but he continued before I could speak. "I've seen this before. The finger-shaped bruises, the split lip, the way you apologize for existing." His voice remained soft, but his eyes had gone cold. "Someone's been hurting you for a while, and tonight it escalated. Something inside me that had been holding together through sheer force of will finally broke. His name is Ortegon Robert." My voice cracked. "He's my supervisor." "How long?" 6 months. The words started spilling out faster. It started small, comments about my clothes, standing too close, touching my shoulder during meetings. Then he started keeping me late, saying we needed to discuss my performance. He'd back me into corners, put his hands on me. When I tried to report it to HR, he showed them documentation, performance reviews he'd fabricated showing I was incompetent, unreliable. He told me if I pushed it, he'd make sure I never worked in tech again. Matos listened with absolute stillness. Only his eyes moved, tracking every detail, growing colder with each sentence. Tonight he cornered me in the parking garage after forcing me to stay late. He said we needed to discuss my performance issues. When I tried to leave, he grabbed me, shoved me against the wall. I barely got away. Where does he have access to you? My apartment building. My office. He knows my schedule, my routes. The words felt heavy, hopeless. He has connections with the executives. Everyone believes him, not me. Matos pulled out his phone. He spoke rapidly in Italian, his voice clipped and cold. When he hung up, he looked at me with those dark, assessing eyes. Ortegon Robert will be detained tonight on unrelated charges. He won't be near you for at least 72 hours. That gives us time to build your case properly. I stared at him, stunned by the swift certainty. I can't afford to owe you anything. His expression didn't soften, but something shifted in his gaze. You don't owe me anything. What was done to you was wrong, and I'm going to make it right. That's not a debt. That's basic human decency. Dr. Sarah Chen's office was in a building I'd never have found on my own, accessible only through a private entrance that Marcus unlocked with a key card. The waiting room looked like someone's elegant living room rather than a medical facility. Dr. Chen herself was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She didn't ask questions beyond the medical ones. Each injury was photographed from multiple angles, documented with clinical precision. Her hands were gentle as she cleaned the split lip, applied butterfly bandages, examined the bruises blooming across my arms and ribs. This will heal, she said softly. All of it will heal. When we left, Matos guided me to his car, the same sleek black vehicle I'd seen outside Nocturne. You're not going back to your apartment tonight. He knows where you live. And you're not going back there until he's handled permanently. I can't afford a hotel. The protest came automatically, exhaustion making me stupid. And I don't want to owe you more than I already do. His expression remained calm as he started the engine. You don't owe me anything. What was done to you was wrong, and I'm going to make it right. That's not a debt, that's basic human decency. The apartment he took me to was in a high-rise with security I couldn't have bypassed if I tried. 23rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that looked expensive enough to make me afraid to sit down. The guest bedroom had its own bathroom and a lock on the door, which Matos pointed out deliberately. You're safe here. No one gets past my security. Over the next week, I learned what Matos Lloyd's resources actually meant. People appeared and disappeared at his command. Lawyers, investigators, IT specialists who could retrieve deleted files. Marcus brought me clothes in my size without me asking, food when I couldn't eat, and maintained a respectful distance that somehow made me feel protected rather than trapped. On the 7th day, Matos called me to his office, a space as controlled and elegant as the man himself. He spread folders across the mahogany desk, his expression grim. He's done this before. 3 previous victims at other companies. All of them were paid off with NDAs. All of them left their jobs rather than fight him. We found security footage from your building that he thought he'd deleted. We interviewed coworkers who witnessed his behavior but were too intimidated to speak up. I stared at the evidence, overwhelming and irrefutable. Other women, other lives he'd destroyed. Matos leaned forward, his dark eyes holding mine. He's going to do it again unless we stop him completely. I need to know if you're willing to fight him, because I can make him disappear tonight, or we can destroy him the right way through every legal and professional channel. He paused, letting the weight of both options settle between us. Your choice, Anita. But either way, he never touches you again. I looked at the folders spread across Matos's desk, at the evidence of Ortegon's pattern of destruction, at the faces of women who'd been silenced. A week ago, I would have chosen silence too, would have taken whatever escape Matos offered and disappeared into a new life where no one knew what had happened. But a week of safety, of sleeping without fear, of Matos's quiet certainty that I deserved protection, had changed something fundamental. I want him to face consequences. My voice was steadier than I expected. Real ones. I want his other victims to see that speaking up works. Matos studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. He pulled out his phone and began making calls. Lawyers, HR consultants, advocacy organizations. His network moved with the same swift efficiency I'd seen that first night. When he finished, he looked at me directly. You should know, there are always 2 of my people watching your apartment, your work, everywhere you go. It's been that way since the first night. Ortegan gets released tomorrow, and I'm not taking chances. The information should have frightened me. Instead, I felt an odd mixture of comfort and unease. Why are you doing this? The question came out quieter than intended. Why do you care about a stranger's problem? He was silent for a moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he leaned back in his chair, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Because I saw someone hurting and terrified who needed help that no one else was providing. Because men like Ortegan operate because people like me usually look the other way. He paused, then added, because you mattered the moment you crashed through my door looking for safety. The honesty in his voice made my throat tight. If this moment hit you in the chest, if you understand what it means to finally be seen and protected, drop a comment below. Tell me about a time someone showed up for you when no one else would. And subscribe, because this community is built on stories of resilience just like this one. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. Ortegan's been released. That night, it started. My phone rang at 2 a.m. with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, Ortegan's voice was smooth, reasonable, the same tone he'd used during our performance reviews. Anita, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Whatever you're planning, whatever lies that criminal has convinced you to tell, you need to stop. This won't end well for you. I hung up, hands shaking. The phone rang again immediately. Then again, Marcus appeared in my doorway, summoned by some alert system I didn't understand, and simply took the phone from my hands and powered it down. The emails started the next morning, professional at first, suggesting we meet to discuss the situation like adults, then increasingly threatening as I didn't respond. My family, whom I hadn't spoken to in 2 years, began calling. Ortegan had contacted them, painted me as unstable, delusional, destroying an innocent man's career with false accusations. Each message, each call, each attempt to isolate and discredit me was exactly what Matos had predicted, and each time I felt the old fear rising, threatening to pull me back into silence. I remembered the folders on Matos's desk. The other women. The pattern. I wasn't fighting just for myself anymore. The call came from Bridgemont's HR director on Tuesday morning. Miss Pinkston, we need you to attend a meeting Friday at 10. There will be representatives from senior leadership present to discuss some concerns that have been raised about your performance and conduct. The phrasing was careful, professional, but I heard the trap underneath. I thanked her calmly and hung up before calling Matos. He listened in silence as I explained. Then I heard him exhale slowly. He's discovered you're connected to me. He knows his usual tactics won't work, so he's trying to destroy your credibility before you can expose him. Classic predator playbook. Within an hour, I was in Matos's office. Marcus had retrieved the official meeting notice from my work email. Matos read it with an expression that made me glad his anger wasn't directed at me. He's presenting fabricated evidence to the executives, framing your accusations as retaliation for legitimate performance management. He's going to suggest you're unstable, possibly dangerous. The fear I'd been holding at bay crashed over me. They'll believe him. He has documentation, relationships with those executives. I have nothing but my word. Matos's eyes met mine, cold and certain. You have evidence. You have testimony from his other victims. You have security footage and medical documentation in a pattern of predation that spans years. And you have me. He spent the next 4 days preparing me. We sat in his office for hours as he walked me through what Ortegan would say, how the executives would question me, the ways they'd try to discredit my testimony. His questions were harder than anything HR could throw at me, deliberately brutal to ensure I wouldn't break under pressure. When I faltered, when the old shame tried to creep back in, he stopped. Look at me, Anita. What happened to you was not your fault. Say it. I made myself meet his gaze. What happened to me was not my fault. Again. Like you believe it. By Thursday night, I was exhausted but steady. Matos reviewed the evidence one final time, his expression grim with satisfaction. Everything here is irrefutable. Security footage, financial records, testimony from multiple victims, medical documentation. He can't lie his way out of this. You're really going to be there? The question came out smaller than I intended. His expression softened slightly. I'll be in that room. Not to speak for you, but to make sure they actually listen. and to make very clear what happens if they don't. Friday morning arrived too quickly. I dressed carefully in a blazer that hid the fading bruises, pulled my hair back, looked at myself in the mirror, and barely recognized the woman staring back. A week ago, I'd been stumbling through rain, broken and terrified. Now I was walking into a room to face my abuser with evidence and support and the absolute certainty that I deserved justice. Matos was waiting by the car, Marcus beside him. His dark eyes swept over me once, assessing. Ready? I took a breath. Ready. The conference room was all glass and polished steel, designed to intimidate. Ortegan sat at the head of the table, flanked by two senior executives I recognized from company photos. His fabricated evidence was spread out in neat folders, his expression calm and confident. He looked at me with something like pity when I entered. Then Matos walked in behind me, and every head turned. His presence changed the atmosphere immediately. The executives shifted uncomfortably. The HR director, a woman named Patricia Chen, stood. "Mr. Lloyd, this is a private employment matter. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to wait outside." Matos's expression didn't change. "I'm here as Miss Pinkston's personal security and legal observer." His tone was polite, but absolutely final. The unspoken suggestion that this wasn't negotiable hung in the air. Patricia hesitated, then gestured for us to sit. Matos positioned himself beside me, close enough that I could feel his steady presence, far enough to make clear this was my fight. Ortegan began his presentation with the smooth confidence of someone who'd rehearsed extensively. 6 months of documented performance issues, missed deadlines, errors in her work that required constant correction, inappropriate conduct toward colleagues that multiple people have reported. He looked directly at the executives, his expression pained. "I've tried everything to help Miss Pinkston improve, but instead of taking responsibility, she's chosen to make false accusations that could destroy my career and reputation." He was good, persuasive, sympathetic. The executives were nodding along, already convinced. Then Patricia turned to me. "Miss Pinkston, would you like to respond to these allegations?" My voice shook when I started. 6 months ago, Ortegan Robert began making inappropriate comments about my appearance, standing too close, touching my shoulder, my back, my arm during meetings. When I tried to distance myself, he started keeping me late, backing me into corners, putting his hands on me. Ortegan interrupted, his tone gentle and concerned. "Anita, I think we all understand you're under a lot of stress. Perhaps we should discuss getting you some help." The patronizing kindness in his voice, the way he was painting me as unstable, made something cold settle in my chest. I continued, my voice growing stronger. 3 weeks ago, he cornered me in the supply room and put his hand up my skirt. 2 weeks ago, he grabbed me in the parking garage and told me if I reported him, he'd make sure I never worked again. Last Tuesday, he shoved me against a wall and split my lip. One of the executives opened his mouth to speak, but Matos made a subtle gesture. Marcus appeared from where he'd been standing by the door, carrying a stack of folders. He distributed them silently to everyone at the table. The room went silent as people opened them. I watched Ortegan's face as his confident facade crumbled. He went pale, then flushed, his hands gripping the table edge. "This is fabricated," he said, his voice no longer smooth. "Someone's been manipulating evidence to frame me." Matos finally spoke, his voice dangerously soft. "Everything in those folders has been verified by independent investigators and is currently being reviewed by both employment lawyers and criminal prosecutors." He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes fixed on the executives. "You can handle this internally, or I can ensure it becomes very, very public. Your choice." The legal team moved with the kind of speed that only came from genuine fear. Ortegan was suspended before the meeting ended, escorted from the building by security while his office was locked and sealed. Within 24 hours, Bridgemont had hired an external investigation firm, and the floodgates opened. People who'd witnessed Ortegan's behavior started coming forward. A coworker who'd seen him corner me in the supply room but was too afraid to speak up. An assistant who'd experienced similar treatment 2 years ago and been paid off with an NDA that Matos's lawyers were now challenging. A former employee who'd left rather than endure another day of his predation. Each testimony built on the last, creating an undeniable pattern. Within a week, Ortegan was terminated. Criminal charges followed. Assault, battery, harassment. His reputation, so carefully cultivated, crumbled to nothing. The previous victims from other companies began coming forward, adding their voices to a chorus that could no longer be silenced. I watched it all from the safety of Matos's apartment, which had somehow become mine without discussion. I'd taken medical leave, Not from weakness but from wisdom, to focus on healing properly. Dr. Chen had referred me to a trauma counselor, a woman named Dr. Rachel Martinez who specialized in workplace assault. The sessions were difficult, painful, necessary. Matos visited every day. Sometimes he brought food from restaurants I'd never have tried on my own. Sometimes he just sat across from me in comfortable silence, working on his laptop while I read or stared out at the city. He never pushed, never asked for more than I could give, but his presence was constant and reassuring. One evening, 3 weeks after the confrontation, I finally asked the question that had been building. "What do you want from me?" The words came out blunt, exhausted. "Does this protection come with expectations?" He looked up from his laptop, his dark eyes serious. "I want you to heal. I want you to feel safe. I want you to reclaim the life Ortegon tried to steal from you. That's all." He closed the laptop, giving me his full attention. "If someday you want more, if you see me as more than just the man who helped you when you needed it, then we'll talk about that. But right now, you don't owe me anything except honesty about what you need." The relief that washed over me was almost physical. What I need is time. To remember who I was before Ortegon. To figure out who I am now. Then take it. His voice was gentle but certain. "I'm not going anywhere," and he didn't. Through the difficult therapy sessions and the nights when panic attacks woke me at 3 a.m, through the days when I could barely get out of bed and the days when I felt strong enough to walk through the city without fear, through the preliminary hearings and the moments when I doubted my own strength, Matos stayed. Not controlling, not possessive, just steadily present, teaching me through his actions that protection didn't require surrender, that accepting help wasn't weakness, and that I deserved safety without conditions. Slowly, carefully, I began to believe him. 4 months after the confrontation, I started at Quantum Systems, a mid-sized tech firm with a female CEO and an executive team that had implemented harassment policies long before they became legally required. Matos had made introductions, but the job I'd earned on my own merit. My skills, which Ortegon had spent months convincing me were inadequate, turned out to be exactly what they needed. The nightmares faded gradually. First 1 full night of sleep, then 2, then a week. Dr. Martinez called it progress. I called it miraculous. I reconnected with Sarah, a friend from college I'd ghosted during Ortegon's campaign of isolation. We met for coffee, and when she asked what had happened, I told her the truth. Not all of it, not the darkest parts, but enough. She listened without judgment, then simply said, "I'm glad you're okay now." 3 evenings a week, I attended self-defense classes taught by Marcus and another of Matos's people, a woman named Sophia who moved like water and hit like steel. It wasn't about being able to fight off an attacker. It was about reclaiming my body as my own, about feeling powerful in my own skin again. My relationship with Matos shifted in small, careful increments. He learned to ask instead of assume. "What do you need?" replaced his earlier tendency to simply provide. When I wanted to take the train to work instead of his car, he asked if I'd carry the phone he'd given me, then respected my choice when I said yes. When I wanted to visit my apartment to collect more of my things, he asked if I wanted company, then waited in the car when I said I needed to do it alone. I learned to voice needs I'd been taught to suppress. "I need space tonight. I need you here. I need to talk about what happened. I need to think about anything else." Each statement became easier, and Matos received them all with the same steady acceptance. One evening in late spring, I came home from a particularly good therapy session. Dr. Martinez had walked me through a cognitive exercise about blame and responsibility, and something had finally clicked. What Ortegon did wasn't my fault. Not the harassment, not the assault, not the isolation or the fear. None of it had been my fault. Matos was in the kitchen, preparing dinner as he often did on nights when his schedule allowed. I walked up behind him, put my hand on his shoulder to turn him around, and kissed him. It was gentle, tentative, an exploration rather than a demand. For a moment, he went completely still. Then his hands came up to cup my face with careful tenderness, and he kissed me back with a restraint that spoke of how much he was holding back. When we broke apart, his dark eyes searched mine. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." My voice was steady. "I'm ready to see what this could be." His smile was small but genuine. "Then we take it slow. At your pace. Always." And we did. The trial began on a cold Monday in November, nearly 8 months after I'd stumbled through the rain into Nocturne. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate, which somehow made it worse. Ortegon sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, his expression carefully composed into wounded dignity. 5 of us testified. Women from different companies, different cities, bound together by the same pattern of predation. Each story was different in its details, but identical in its architecture. The grooming, the isolation, the escalation, the threats, the systematic destruction of credibility that kept us silent. When my turn came, I walked to the witness stand with my head up. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Delgado, guided me through the timeline. 6 months of harassment, the assaults, the fabricated documentation, the night in the parking garage that had finally broken me. I didn't apologize, didn't minimize, didn't look away. I recounted every detail while maintaining eye contact with the jury, letting them see that I was telling the truth. Ortegan's defense attorney, a man whose expensive suit matched his client's, tried to discredit me during cross-examination. "Isn't it true, Miss Pinkston, that you're currently in a relationship with Matos Lloyd, a man with known criminal connections? Isn't it possible that your testimony has been influenced by his desire to, shall we say, eliminate competition?" The implication was clear and disgusting. Before I could respond, Catherine objected. The judge sustained, but Catherine addressed it in her redirect anyway. "Miss Pinkston sought help from someone who actually listened and acted, after her employer and the systems that should have protected her failed completely. That's called survival, not fabrication." Matos sat in the courtroom every day, not in the front row where his presence would be obvious, but far enough back to be respectful, close enough that I could find him when I needed the reminder that I wasn't alone. He never spoke, never drew attention, but everyone knew he was there, a quiet reminder that I was protected and valued. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman's voice was steady as she read the verdict. Guilty on all counts, multiple charges of assault, battery, criminal harassment, abuse of power. Ortegan's face went white, then red. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison and permanent registration as a sex offender. His career, his reputation, his freedom, all gone. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. Matos stood beside me as I faced the cameras, his presence steady but unobtrusive. For 6 months, I believed I was powerless. My voice was clear, carrying across the steps. I believed no one would help me, and that speaking up would only make things worse. I was wrong. There are people who will fight for you if you find the courage to ask. I looked directly into the nearest camera. And to anyone still suffering in silence from workplace abuse, your voice matters. You deserve protection. You deserve justice. Don't let them convince you otherwise. The trial is over. Justice has been served, but Anita and Matos' story isn't finished yet. If you want to see how their relationship evolves from protection to partnership, subscribe now because the ending is going to hit different. 1 year after stumbling through the rain into Nocturne, I stood in front of a conference room full of advocates and lawyers, presenting a workshop on supporting workplace harassment survivors. My voice was steady as I outlined the barriers victims face, the systems that fail them, the importance of believing and protecting rather than questioning and isolating. Quantum Systems had promoted me to senior analyst 3 months ago. My team respected my work, my input was valued in meetings, and I'd built relationships based on competence and mutual respect rather than fear. The contrast to my time under Ortegan was so stark, it sometimes felt like a different life entirely. Twice a week, I volunteered with the Foundation for Workplace Justice, an organization Matos had quietly funded after my case went public. We provided legal resources, counseling referrals, and advocacy support for people facing harassment. Each person I helped felt like reclaiming another piece of myself that Ortegan had tried to take. My relationship with Matos had deepened into something neither of us had anticipated that first night. He'd learned that protecting me meant supporting my independence, not controlling my choices. I'd learned that his fierce care came from love rather than possession, and accepting it didn't diminish my strength but affirmed it. On the anniversary of the night we met, Matos took me back to Nocturne. The lounge looked the same, all amber lighting and expensive promise, but I was different. I walked through those doors with my head high, no longer the broken woman fleeing through the rain. He'd arranged a private dinner in the same booth where I'd first told him about Ortegan. I wanted to replace that memory, he explained, with something better. Over wine that I could now appreciate rather than need for shock. We talked and laughed in a way that would have seemed impossible a year ago. I looked around the booth, remembering how trapped I'd felt, how terrified and hopeless. "That night I crashed through your door," I said, holding his gaze. "I was running from someone who tried to destroy me. I thought I was stumbling into more danger. I didn't know I was actually stumbling toward safety, toward someone who would show me I deserved protection and care. You saved me, Matos." He took my hand gently, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. You saved yourself. I just made sure you had the space and support to do it. You're the strongest person I know, Anita. I smiled. No longer the woman who couldn't make eye contact, who apologized for existing, who carried shame that was never hers to bear. We saved each other. You showed me I deserved protection. I showed you that real strength is protecting someone's right to be powerful on their own terms, not controlling them. He raised his glass. To new beginnings. I raised mine. To healing. We clinked glasses softly. To the unexpected ways disaster can lead to salvation. When we left Nocturne that night, I walked with my head high, Matos's hand warm in mine. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I was walking toward a future I'd built on my own terms, with someone who'd stood beside me while I remembered how to be strong. Finally, completely, I was free.